Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Spectator Sports. This is Sebastian Fonseca. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday weekend. We had so many big things going on with the NBA Christmas Day games and also an action-packed weekend across the NFL. But before we get into it, please like and subscribe to the channel. It makes a massive difference to the YouTube algorithm. And also take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. The links are in the description. So to kick things off, we had the Minnesota Vikings take on the New York Giants, and this is a matchup of two teams that are going to be in the postseason mix. The Giants have yet to clinch a playoff berth, but they'll do so in the next couple of weeks as long as they don't have a major collapse in their camp. The Vikings are coming off that historic victory last week with them being down 33-0 at halftime and rallying into overtime and beating the Indianapolis Colts. This was again another last-second victory as their kicker Joseph was able to make a 61-yard kick at the gun to spur them to victory, and now they are 12-3 on the year, having a good chance to lock up that number 2 seed next week, but they have some things left in play. Overall, this team knows how to execute in late game situations. They ran the 2-minute drill to perfection, really utilizing Justin Jefferson, who's having a historic season. He has a decent shot to break Megatron's single season receiving yards record of 1964. He's been still having a very nice season nonetheless. He's leading the league in receiving yards, and I'm very impressed with this play. He's been turning it on to a whole nother gear since the second half of the season. To bring back an older scenario with this new extended format with the regular season, back in the 70s we had OJ Simpson, who was a running back for the Buffalo Bills. He's obviously famous for a lot more things later on in his life, but in his football playing career he had a 2,000-yard season in just 14 games. Now obviously Eric Dickerson was able to break that record, and which still stands today with 16 games that he rushed for 2,105 yards. Really close to breaking it for a couple members of that club with Adrian Peterson, Derrick Henry, but still Eric Dickerson has that record. Now Megatron's record is through 16 games, and we've known that Justin Jefferson has that luxury of that extra game. It definitely brings up some debate whether these records should have a different category, as we remember last season when Cooper Kupp was potentially on the brink of breaking Megatron's record. He didn't do so even with the benefit of that extra game. My personal take is that they should definitely look into having a separate record for these single season records. Now, Peyton Manning's single season touchdown record could be broken at some point with the luxury of an extra game. The record for single season passing yards, same kind of deal. So we'll see what happens, but I am of the format of keeping things with the 16 game format in one category and then moving things to a 17 game format in another. Now we had a really great game on Christmas Eve between the NFC East rivals of the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. Unfortunately for the Eagles, they were missing Jalen Hurts as he missed the game with a sprained shoulder, and that's going to be something to watch for as the regular season winds down. Some reports are saying that the injury is more serious than initially reported. He might be out for the rest of the regular season. I think he has a decent shot to play against the New Orleans Saints next week, but we'll see. It really just depends on how he feels going into the practice. If he misses a single practice, especially Thursday, I think he's going to be out. But they went with Gardner Minshew, who's been historically a backup or a fringe starting quarterback in this league. Really solid game from him. He had 2 interceptions. The biggest thing about this was the Eagles pass rush really got after Dak Prescott early in this game. It altered a couple throws. One of them was actually intercepted for a touchdown, and that helped the Eagles race out to an early 10-0 lead. Now, just like in that Washington game that they lost, the Eagles were marred by turnovers in this game. They had 4 turnovers in this game alone, and that resulted in 20 Cowboys points. And when you do that and you lose the turnover margin -3 and you give up that many points, it's going to be really hard to even be competitive in that type of game. Nonetheless, the Eagles were actually very much in this game. They were in control of this game in the third quarter, but then a turnover by an exchange between Boston Scott and Gardner Minshew led to a touchdown by the Dallas Cowboys. Now, those 2 interceptions that I mentioned by Gardner Minshew really wasn't his fault. They were both targeted over to Quez Watkins, a guy I'm personally a fan of. Now, that's really up for debate within the fan base of the Eagles, but I think he's a solid burner. He's a great deep threat receiver, but in terms of running the routes within shorter to intermediate routes, he has to get some work in on that. He had some opportunities, but he really came up small, especially with having his strength come into question, where both those targets that resulted in interceptions were his way, and he was out-muscled for both of them. One, a guy climbed over the back of him and basically beat him to the ball, and the second one was really just a defensive back wrestling the ball away from Wes Watkins, so that's really disappointing. I can't blame Gardner Minshew for those interceptions. The last turnover was a Miles Sanders turnover, which resulted in another field goal for Dallas. Overall, Dallas was really good in finishing off drives for the most part. Overall, Dallas did a good job in utilizing those turnovers and turning them into points, like I mentioned earlier. There was a few crucial losses for the Eagles in this game as well, where they lost Lane Johnson, Avonte Maddox, and those two players are really integral to their team, as Avonte Maddox has been the starting nickel corner, and as soon as he left the game, this is when Kellen Moore picked apart the Eagles defense, utilizing CeeDee Lamb in the slot, and this is where the backup corner in the nickel position, Josiah Scott, had no real chance to guard a guy like CD's caliber. In the second half, just when they seized control yet again, turnovers plagued them and Dallas was able to get back into the game. There was this huge sequence where a couple sacks, one by Josh Sweat and then another one by Hassan Reddick, but they had a 3rd and 30 situation and they used a bomb to T.Y. Hilton, who's really been sitting on his couch for a majority of the season. Now, he was signed in place of their potential signing of Odell Beckham Jr. It was a really interesting scenario where I thought they were going to sign Odell, but it doesn't seem like the medical reports support Odell having a decent chance to play in the regular season, let alone the postseason, but they decided to go with T.Y. And in his first true rep, really burned the Eagles. He caught Darius Slay napping in the backfield. He was looking for anticipating something maybe on the flat, and then Josiah Scott, who was playing the safety at that point, was late to rotate there. It's pretty much an uncontested catch there. Disappointing by the Eagles nonetheless, and that turned into a touchdown. It just takes a lot to beat this Eagles team, and these two losses, I just think they're very fluky. It took 4 turnovers in both games. It took the Eagles really shooting themselves in the foot. To conclude, despite the Eagles losing this game, I think the Dallas Cowboys are going to take this to the bank, thinking that they can beat this team. 1, they didn't have Jalen Hurts. 2, the defense that is deemed to be an elite pass rush. They didn't get any sacks on Gardner Minshew, who's a more stationary target compared to Jalen Hurts. And then 3, it took 4 turnovers for this even to be a competitive game, and still they only lost by 6 points with a chance to win the game on the final drive. Taking a more positive spin on this is beneficial for the Eagles. They had it right there. The chance of them locking up home field advantage is still very much alive. They have 2 more chances to do so. They played the New Orleans Saints on New Year's Day. I think they'll be able to take care of business regardless who's at quarterback. I think the Saints are just not really an elite team to contend with the Eagles, even when the Eagles may not be at full strength. Anything can happen on any given Sunday, obviously. I hope Jalen can return just to ice that up, and then he can rest for 2-3 weeks before they get ready for the postseason. To summarize though, I think this team has a lot of strengths, and the only thing that's proven to really beat them is themselves. And a big shout out to Devonta Smith. I mean, he had a phenomenal game, probably his best in his young career. He had 2 touchdowns, 8 catches for 113 yards, joining A.J. Brown as the other 1,000-yard receiver and the first Eagles wide receiving pair to put up 1,000 yards in the same season. So shout out to him. Clearly not just a wide receiver 1 in A.J. Brown, they have a wide receiver 1A, 1B in Devonta Smith, so very lethal tandem there. And then in a night matchup between the Oakland Raiders and the Pittsburgh Steelers, this is a historic rivalry back in the 70s, and the centerpiece around this matchup is actually Franco Harris, whose number was going to be retired on Christmas Eve, actually the 50th anniversary of the Immaculate Reception. And for my fans that don't know about some of the older lore of the NFL, you have to look this up on YouTube probably, but a phenomenal exchange where the Raiders were up and it was kind of a Hail Mary situation for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but Terry Bradshaw threw a pass that was deflected and caught by Franco Harris, and he just found a way to score off the ricochet and took it in, sending the Pittsburgh Steelers to the AFC Championship game that year. Unfortunately, he did pass away the week leading up to this game, and just really sad. I mean, he's a legend for the Steelers, a really nice guy overall, talented player nonetheless, and part of a huge part of their dynasty back in the 70s. The Steelers played with heavy hearts, and they had their jerseys kind of in the same kind of block numbered format that they used to have during those Franco Harris, Terry Bradshaw days. They got off to a slow start. They had an issue with covering Hunter Renfrow, who's been back after a long stint of injuries with the Las Vegas Raiders, and he scored the opening touchdown for the Raiders in the first quarter. In the second half, this is when Kenny Pickett and the offense finally woke up, and they led a touchdown drive to go ahead 13-10. I'm really impressed with Kenny Pickett's development. I mean, it was a slow start. He's been working with a patchwork offensive line, decent weapons. I mean, Pickens has been solid. I mean, they also have Deontay Johnson, and then Freiermuth is a solid tight end. They're gonna have to find a way to really build around him if they want him to be their franchise quarterback moving forward. But just like any Mike Tomlin team, when they were sub 500, I mean, they were probably a 2-5 team, possibly worse. They just found ways to win. Mike Tomlin doesn't believe in tanking. He has had a streak of winning seasons or non-losing seasons, so now with this extra 17th game, he has to win the next 2 to secure that. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that, but hey, I'm rooting for Mike Tomlin. He's one of the best head coaches in this game, and they really made a guy like Franco Harris proud. So with this heroic performance, I'm really impressed by the Steelers. They've been putting things together late, and they're building towards the next season. The Raiders, this is just kind of a typical case where Derek Carr has now really put the Raiders in a bind. Those turnovers against the LA Rams really hurt them, and now this too. If they had those 2 wins, it could have been a totally different season for the Raiders. And now their playoff hopes are basically on life support at this moment, so I think they're gonna miss the playoffs. They'll be one of those teams that are in the mid-tier but just don't have enough to make the postseason. And I don't know what they're going to do in this offseason. It definitely seems like Josh Jacobs is fed up. I mean, I would be fed up too. It's been a hard season for Vegas. They had a lot of big hopes for the acquisition of Devonta Adams to make some noise in the AFC. Them missing out on the postseason is a huge disappointment. So they have some work to do. I've previously voiced my opinions of trading Derek Carr to a team that is just a quarterback away, utilizing some picks and drafting a quarterback. I still am a firm believer of that, so we'll see what happens. New thing with the NFL this year, usually the NFL takes a backseat to the NBA and lets the NBA have Christmas Day for a showcase of 5 games. Now, with the NFL, now with Christmas this year falling on a Sunday, they decided to go with 3 games, and the first one was Green Bay going to Miami. This game couldn't have got off to a better start for the Miami Dolphins. They had explosive plays. I mean, Jalen Waddle took a slant and took it all the way 84 yards to the house. They had a big play from Tyreek Hill for 50 yards that set up a touchdown. But still, they were able to keep the Packers in this game. Shout out to the Packers, who are still clinging on to postseason hopes as they showed a lot of fight in the last few weeks. Now, the biggest thing for the Miami Dolphins is determining whether Tua is the guy. We've had issues with him before where they had a matchup with the Buffalo Bills back in 2020. The Bills had nothing to play for, but Tua came up small in the cold up in Buffalo and lost that matchup. This season, after starting the year 8-3 and a bevy of those wins in the middle part of the season, was beating up on weaker competition. Once they played teams like the Niners, the Chargers, the Buffalo Bills, they started losing, and now those are a gauntlet of teams that they had to face, but they had to find ways to win. They can't just drop off a cliff, and that's what happened. And now they've lost 4 in a row as a result of 3 huge interceptions by Tua. I mean, you could talk about the inaccuracies or the lack thereof against the Chargers, where he was 10 out of 28. He actually had a solid game against Buffalo, so I can't totally fault him for that. He single-handedly lost them this game, where he was trying to look off defensive backs and find the open read there if his first read was taken up. And the defensive backs are just not really buying that anymore. They just know that he's a creature of habit, and they know that he's just going to look off somebody to the opposite side and then go with the initial first read. And if that first read isn't there, then Tua is in trouble. All those interceptions were definitely on Tua. You can't say that there was a miscommunication. One, the ball sailed on him when he was trying to find Tyreek Hill. That was to Jair Alexander. Another one, he just didn't see Devonta Campbell, and he picked that off. And then the last one to Rasul Douglas, just a total misthrow that ended up sealing the game for Green Bay. So really disappointed. I mean, Tua has had a loaded roster this season. They invested in Tua. They invested draft capital to help out his development with Jalen Waddle last season. They traded for Tyreek Hill. They went for it. I mean, they got a pass rusher in Bradley Chubb in the trade deadline. So the Dolphins put all their eggs in one basket. They supported him. They got him one of the best young offensive minds in the league. I think he is a solid quarterback, but he's just not that guy that's a franchise-altering quarterback. And there's nothing really wrong with that, but he's going to be holding this team back and probably going to be one of the weakest quarterbacks in the AFC postseason if they even make it. There's some news that broke that he was now been put into concussion protocol on Monday. So he did take a nasty hit in that first half that he somehow was able to be cleared to play, and we all know he has a history with concussions. He was cleared to play after getting up wobbly against the Buffalo Bills earlier in this season, and then he took another big hit in the following week, and which was a short week actually. So really worried about Tua's long-term health. I mean, if this is another concussion that is serious, I mean, he has to maybe look into the mirror and think that if football is really the best thing for his future, I mean, just his life, his quality of life. In the second game of this Christmas Day slate in the NFL, we had the Denver Broncos taking on the LA Rams. On paper, going into the season, obviously probably a more enticing matchup. You get Russell Wilson, and then you have the defending Super Bowl champs, but the NFL season had other ideas when we saw that obviously Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford are out for the season, and then Russell Wilson's play has simply fell off a cliff. And with this latest loss, I mean, it clearly shows that the Denver Broncos have quit. I mean, the Denver Broncos defense has been their calling card for not only this season, but for a plethora of seasons as they've accrued a lot of talent. But they gave up 51 points to a Baker Mayfield-led offense. Not impressed by them. I think they totally quit. And as a result, that means Nathaniel Hackett had to take the blame for that as he was fired on Monday. And obviously, I think he's the scapegoat in this scenario. I mean, he was in over his head from the jump. He was probably anticipating that the Broncos would get Aaron Rodgers as he was their offensive coordinator for the Packers last season, but they had to go with Russell Wilson. Definitely should have made more use of that opportunity. On paper, at least, Russ was supposed to be a better quarterback, and he was supposed to coach him to be a better quarterback, but it just never seemed to fit. So we're going to see what the Broncos are going to have to do moving forward. They're going to get an early start on their head coaching search. But if I'm a coach, I'm not sure if I really want this job. I mean, they're a mess. They have a great defense, but their offense is scary for sure. I don't know what to really do. And then to get to Russell Wilson, I mean, he had a really bad game. I mean, he had 3 picks, just 1 touchdown pass. Never seemed like the Broncos were ever going to be in this game. He had actually, in his first 5 passing attempts, he had 2 interceptions. And we actually saw Patrick Starr on the play-by-play talking about how he's not cooking in the right ways. If you want to watch the Nickelodeon broadcast, I highly recommend that you do so for some entertainment. Maybe have it on a simulcast while you're watching the CBS broadcast, but really entertaining. I love the slime stuff that they do, really just fun stuff for the NFL. Getting back to Russ though, he has never lived up to that big contract that he signed in the offseason. And now the Broncos are stuck with this albatross of a contract. I mean, Russ has tried to be this cheerleader with the pom-poms, talking about Broncos country, let's ride, all this stuff, trying to be Mr. Positive. Maybe that's his personality, sure, but it's just rubbed so many people the wrong way. We saw tensions really boiling on the sideline. I mean, offensive linemen aren't willing to help him up. The refs, I heard, were barely trying to help him up after he got knocked down. Just a mess. He's been getting on the nerves of his receivers, just not being the best of teammates. And a lot has come out in this season with a lot of his former teammates back in Seattle. We know Marshawn Lynch, we know Richard Sherman, and they came on a podcast talking about how it's just so difficult to be in touch with Russ as he doesn't have the personal number of his teammates. The teammates have to reach out to his trainer first, which I just think is not the coolest of things to do. I mean, I think you want to be on a more personal relationship with the quarterback of your team. He's rubbed guys the wrong way. I mean, for his birthday party, I heard a lot of people didn't even want to come. Now, we could talk about how that was a Tuesday, so that was difficult to do with the early practice the next day. But I think, if you like somebody, you do at least show face to somebody's birthday party. So not a really likable guy. He's been not performing. Russ is made a mess of his career, and I don't think anybody's been a bigger disappointment than Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos this year. And then the last game of this Christmas Day slate with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the Arizona Cardinals. The Bucs, in this topsy-turvy season that they've had, they had to squeak by the Kyler Murray-less Arizona Cardinals, and it just goes to show that this team is just not going to be making a deep run in this postseason. I mean, there is just so many things wrong. The offense is in flux. They can't protect Brady. Brady is frustrated. He's screaming at his teammates. There are just disconnects in their offense. I mean, they're just not on the right page, not cooperating, not being a cohesive unit. And again, I mean, they were down by 10 points in the third quarter. This was the Arizona Cardinals on their third string quarterback, Trace McSorley. I don't know what's really going to do. I mean, they utilized some matchups and were able to rally late to force overtime, and then they won in overtime. But, I mean, this matchup against the Carolina Panthers is going to be huge. It will determine who basically wins the NFC South. The Bucs can clinch the NFC South if they win against the Panthers, but still, they're going to be probably playing the Dallas Cowboys. The way Dallas has been, they should beat the brakes off this sorry Bucs team. And then with the NBA, I mean, this is their biggest day, at least in the early part of the season, with 5 games to break down, starting off with the Philadelphia 76ers and the New York Knicks. Now, the Knicks has been a really surprising story, as we talked about in this previous episode with Philip. They've been really surprising. I mean, they've won 6 games in a row in December before a loss to the Toronto Raptors. Overall, I mean, Grimes has been another nice knockdown shooter for this team. They've really done well with integrating Jalen Brunson into the lineup. Julius Randle has seemed to found his stroke again and being consistently that all-star caliber player that they need. RJ Barrett has been making strides in improvement to being another good option for the Knicks offense. After racing out to an early double-digit lead, the Sixers superstars were able to really assert their dominance in the second half after cutting the deficit to just 3 points before halftime thanks to a nice half-court buzzer beater by Shake Milton, who is saying that it's all skill. I mean, a lot of people just practice that, so I'll give him his flowers for sure. But nonetheless, they were only down 3 thanks to that nice shot. Big games by James Harden and Joel Embiid. I mean, especially James Harden, who is slowly coming back into form after that foot injury that he sustained earlier on in the season. I mean, Joel Embiid is definitely up there as one of the best big men in the league. I mean, it's just such bad timing again. When you thought the big man was dying, Nikola Jokic is having just superior, wild seasons. And I just feel like Joel is just going to be in this guy's shadow, unfortunately, and he's never going to get that ample respect that he's definitely due. I mean, Joel is a phenomenal talent. He's a beast on the glass, great defender of the paint, but he had another phenomenal offensive game, led Philly to the victory, and now the Sixers are really rounding to form. They've won 8 in a row. They are definitely going to be up there in terms of the top team in the Eastern Conference. I'm really excited to see how the Sixers team continues to gel, as they're probably going to make a move to further excel up the standings, maybe at the trade deadline. And then another matchup with the Dallas Mavericks hosting the LA Lakers. Now, this is a matchup of 2 guys that are very similar games. LeBron has been that point forward that really kind of put that point forward position on the map, and then Luka has been the point guard officially listed as for the Dallas Mavericks, but he's a true point forward with the capability of getting a triple-double on any given night. For the most part, the Lakers looked really good in that first half without Anthony Davis. I mean, I was really impressed with LeBron in particular. He had another great game, as he definitely tried to put on a show for the viewers at home. But in that third quarter, I mean, it was over. They outscored the Lakers 51 points to just 21, pretty much over from there. The final margin was 124 to 115, but it was pretty much over by the end of that third quarter. I mean, they just had so many great contributions from Christian Wood, Tim Hardaway Jr. Just outside shooting has been the Achilles heel for the Lakers, as the Mavs made 18 compared to the Lakers 9. Until Davis gets back, which I don't know when at this point is going to happen, the Lakers are going to be continuing to be a fringe, outside looking in type of team that's going to be lucky to make the play-in tournament. But credit to the Mavs. This is another much needed victory. They need to beat up on these weaker competition, and they need to turn around this season after getting off to a pretty rough start. But I'm happy for Luka. And also a small side note, they did have a statue presentation for the legend Dirk Nowitzki. I mean, this guy has been the best player definitely in franchise history. Super consistent, probably one of the best international players of his time. That title might be passed down to guys like Giannis or Nikola Jokic maybe when it's all said and done, but for now, I think that title definitely belongs to Dirk. Happy for him as well. I mean, his number was retired in the previous season, and now he gets his statue. By far the best Maverick of all time, and hopefully Luka has something to say about that as well as his career continues to grow. But the most exciting matchup, at least on paper, between the top two teams in the Eastern Conference, we had the Milwaukee Bucks traveling to Boston, and this is obviously a rematch of that epic 7-game series that we had in the conference semifinals last postseason. Again, Chris Middleton missed this game, so it was really just Giannis and the guys, but the defense for Boston had another nice performance against guarding Giannis, as he was pretty much smothered for most of this game. His final stats look a lot better on paper, but he was shooting at 1.5 out of 15, had to finish with 9 out of 22 to make the numbers look a little bit better. But again, Jason Tatum had a phenomenal performance with 41 points, and also Jaylen Brown had 29 points as the two combined for 70. The Jays are definitely one of the top duos in this league. I mean, when those two are on it, it's pretty much so hard to compete, especially when they're hitting shots from the outside, as that's been one of Boston's calling cards. I think the Celtics team has a leg up on the Bucs and the other teams in the Eastern Conference. They just are so deep. They have the two best players as a duo. They've been there too. They now have some more veteran quality play. They've made deeper runs, so that experience is going to be big dividends compared to probably the upstart Cleveland Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference. The Bucks have some work to do to try to close that gap, but I definitely hope that they can keep pace with the Celtics, or at least hold on to the 2 seed, because you want to make your life easier. You want to hold off on playing the Celtics up until the very last round possible. And then with this recent rivalry between the Memphis Grizzlies and the Golden State Warriors, the Warriors were able to score a shocking upset victory without Steph Curry on Christmas Day. And a lot of players step up in his absence. I mean, Jordan Poole, Dante DiVincenzo, Clay, I mean, all had pretty solid games to help the Warriors beat this very young upstart Memphis Grizzlies team. I mean, we were hearing a lot of chirping in the offseason, and then also leading up to this game, that the Grizzlies are not really worried about any teams out west. I think that they gotta reevaluate that. Now, yeah, it was a bad game. Ja showed out, but nobody else seemed to really follow him to the Bay Area. I mean, overall, this Grizzlies team is still little brother in this rivalry against the Golden State Warriors, just like how Clay said a lot of great post-game quotes about how you can't be a dynasty if you haven't won anything, which is true. I mean, the Grizzlies were talking about how they have next after beating Steph by himself essentially back in 2021 in that play-in game. They were chirping throughout the offseason about how they would have made a deeper run, or they would have beaten the Golden State Warriors if Ja was able to stay healthy. Well, it's just one game, but the Warriors were able to handle business without their all-time best players. The Grizzlies have some work to do before they can really prove anything, or to really back up this talk that they've been trying to do. I love the confidence, don't get me wrong, but they still haven't proven anything, and the only way to really prove anything is show up in the postseason. So they need to make that next step, make the conference finals, advance to the finals. Obviously would be the biggest thing that's happened for this franchise, is they haven't even advance to the finals ever. They only have one conference finals appearance. So we'll see what happens. I mean, Ja, I think, is primed for that. He's up for the challenge, but it's just a matter of if those other Grizzlies can help him out as well. It's more than just one player. With this final game of this loaded NBA set of games on Christmas Day, we had the Phoenix Suns traveling to Denver to play the Nuggets. Devin Booker was slated to start this game, and he made an appearance briefly before exiting the game in the first quarter with that nagging growing injury that's been giving him trouble as of late. I appreciate him giving it a go, but definitely should have probably sat out and maybe made that injury worse than it had to be. Even without him, though, the Suns were in control for most of this game, but then the Nuggets were able to rally late in the fourth quarter to force overtime. And a great game by Jokic. I mean, it's scary to think, but he might be winning a third MVP trophy. He has a shot, at least, because the Nuggets are top team in the Western Conference. He just had a 41, 15, and 15 game. And then, I mean, we have to give huge kudos to this amazing dunk by Aaron Gordon. I mean, with the game in hand, he could have done something else, maybe taken a Euro step or tried to go for the layup, but he went right at Landry Shamet and just dunked it from way out. I mean, a couple steps outside the restricted area for a dunk. Probably one of the best dunks we've seen on Christmas Day. One of the best dunks we've seen in this season so far. And they were able to finish that game off and seal up the victory. So, like I said, the Nuggets are the top team in the Western Conference. They have looked really good now with Jamal Murray being fully healthy and back with this team. Now they just got to integrate Michael Porter Jr., who's been in and out of the lineup, but he's looking solid in the games that he does play. So I think this team is a real title contender. They just have to continue to put all these pieces together, as they've already been a very good team with just Nikola Jokic. But now that he has some backup, I mean, you got to watch out for this Nuggets team. They're very talented. And that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. Happy holidays once again, and Happy New Year to all my amazing viewers. And also take a look at our Instagram and TikTok pages. Links are in the description. And like and subscribe to the channel. As I said, it makes a massive difference in the YouTube algorithm. Until next time, take care.